Broadcasting from the KMF Collective Studio, it's time for the Keep Moving Forward podcast. Join us every week as we dive into the stories of remarkable current and former athletes that have transitioned into the real world. Now here's your host, Katie Galley.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the 226th episode of the Keep Moving Forward podcast. I'm your host, Katie Galley. In the KMF Collective Studio with me today, I have mental performance coach, founder of Strong Skills, and host of the Intentional Performers podcast, Brian Levenson. How are you doing, Brian?
Good, Katie. Thanks so much for having me. I love your energy and your enthusiasm. So excited to chat with you today and hopefully learn from you and share a few nuggets that I've learned along the way.
Absolutely. Well, I love your energy too, Brian, and I'm super excited to learn from you and about your own journey and your story. And so, Brian, to get to know your background a little bit, could you share with us where you grew up and how, if at all, was your childhood shaped by athletics?
Yeah, so I grew up in Potomac, Maryland, which is right outside Washington, D.C. It's an affluent suburb, although a lot of people there, I remember when I was in high school, I had a teacher have people raise their hand on who considered themselves to be lower class, who considered themselves to be middle class, and who considered themselves to be upper class. And everyone raised their hand to be middle class. So I think it's an area that, there's certainly a lot of wealthy people there, but it's not a place, at least from my perspective, that was so into flaunting and so, defined by money. At least that was my perspective. I'm sure others have different perspectives on the area, but grew up playing all kinds of sports. I'm one of three boys. Me and my brothers are 2.5 years apart. I'm the middle child. So we grew up playing soccer in the basement, basketball in the basement, baseball in the basement, boxing in the basement, obstacle course, American Gladiators in the basement. And after putting a bunch of holes in the wall, we would then go outside and play basketball and roller hockey and street hockey and football and soccer and baseball and home run derby. And so we were all obsessed with sports. My dad was obsessed with sports. We grew up going to, sporting events. So I definitely grew up in a sport family, and my sport of choice was basketball. And unfortunately for me, I was not designed to be a basketball player, either height-wise or athletically. But I was a stubborn kid, and I was pretty good at soccer growing up and played a few other sports, but I really wanted to be a basketball player. And I think if somebody had pulled me aside and told me, Brian, maybe you should focus on some of these other sports that are good for you, being 5'0", 100 I probably would have told them to go kick rocks, and I wanted to play basketball. So, I was just obsessed with it, loved it. Still played, roller hockey, soccer, baseball. So there was a lot of sports. And I felt like my identity was tied to sports in a lot of ways. But once I got to high school, I was smaller than everybody. I was not quite as athletic. So it was a tough time for me because I'd always considered myself to be an athlete. And, it didn't quite work out for me as an athlete in high school. But yeah, I still followed sports and loved it and played it. And today I still, when things are quote unquote normal, I like to play basketball and golf and still enjoy sports a lot. But it was a big part of my childhood for sure.
Yeah. And clearly, I mean, with what you do today. And Brian, have you ever seen the movie Rudy about the football player?
Well, that's why I say 5'0".
That's exactly. I was like, he's quoting that movie.
I walked down the aisle to Rudy. So yes.
Yes. At your wedding, you walked down the aisle?
At my wedding, yeah. My wife was not walking down to Rudy. Trust me, that was not happening. But yeah, and my groomsmen were doing the little Rudy chant as we were walking down. So,
oh my gosh,
he's. I love that movie, and I still tear up at the end when I see him get lifted on their shoulders. So I live vicariously through him. The difference is my friends would always want me to come out for two-a-days for football during the summer in DC, and similar to Atlanta. Summers in where we live are not the most glamorous of times as far as heat goes. And, the clock would hit 6:30 in the morning and they'd be going for 2 days. And I said, you know what, I'm not going to go there to get my ass kicked every day. It doesn't sound that appealing. So I passed on football, which is probably a smart decision for my health and and for everybody else's sanity, including my parents. But yes, love Rudy.
Oh my gosh, that's seriously the most amazing thing I've ever heard, that you walk down the aisle to Rudy with your groomsmen. I mean, that movie, and of course, who doesn't still tear up? I've seen it probably a dozen times, and every time he gets into Notre Dame, every time at the end of the movie, you just have to tear up. It's so just heartwarming, and he achieves his goal at the end. But as soon as you said the 5'0", 100 nothing, I was like, he's quoting Rudy whether he knows it or not.
Oh yeah, that was intentional.
Yes,
that was
yes.
intentional.
Love it. I love it. So Brian, like you said, I mean, going into high school, having that love of basketball and almost that stubbornness because of your passion for the sport, but then having the realization of maybe that wasn't the right sport for you. Did you still have aspirations to try and continue in some way, shape, or form your basketball career or an athletic career at all into college and beyond?
No, it wasn't going to happen. I just wasn't good enough. So I would get cut, like the last cut, and they would say, you need to get bigger and stronger. And, I heard that, and I was very stubborn as a kid. So I never I never really listened to the feedback. I just sort of said, F you, I'll show you. And then nobody really cared. Right. So, it wasn't going to happen. I did coach when I was in high school. So I coached basketball in high school, and then I coached when I was in college. I also coached roller hockey when I was in high school. So I started to fall in love with coaching at a really young age. I think I was a sophomore in high school when I started coaching basketball and coaching hockey. So that's where I think sports stayed with me and really continued to be a part of my life. And so it still was definitely ingrained in me.
What was it about coaching that really kind of spurred your interest and made you realize you wanted to go down that path?
Yeah, so sports coaching, I think the idea that you can sort of have a vision and then you can put the pieces in place to achieve that mission, it's kind of addicting. It's kind of I just love that I could kind of see things before they would happen. And in basketball, that was, I think, my gift. I was a good passer pretty much in any sport. I had a good feel for the game. And so, I think I love that. As I got older, the coaching that I do now is different. It's sort of asking great questions and helping people figure out how to get from where they are to where they want to go, and introducing them to mental skills and frameworks and theories and research and all that good stuff. So it's different, but there was a time where I really considered becoming a basketball coach or a scout. I had an NBA draft website at one point where I would scout hundreds of players and create profiles for them. So,
wow.
I think it's always been something that I just enjoy. And I love the nature of sports in that, you're watching the performance and you don't know what's going to happen. So even though you might have a vision or you might think something's going to go a certain way, it almost never goes exactly as you plan it. And so I think I've always loved the unknown of sports. And I think in some ways it parallels life in that we really don't know when we're going to pass. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. And I find that to be exciting in a lot of ways. So, I love the unknown of sports.
Yeah, it's a funny place to be because it's true. It's the unknown of sports. It's like you can think of that as you don't like it. It's not a fun place to think or be. It's not a good thing to think about. But then two, finding a way to enjoy it or at least live in it. And so having that unknown piece. And then two, for you being able to coach people through that. So being able to live in it and guide people through that. And so Brian, for you, I mean, having that exposure to coaching as a sophomore in high school and then kind of setting you on this path that would ultimately lead you to where you are today with what you do. From that time, how did you kind of get down this path? Did you start to intentionally pursue at that young age coaching? Did that dictate what you wanted to do in college? How did it kind of start to shape your journey?
So college for me, I just took classes that I was interested in. So I was interested in sociology. I was interested in African-American studies, political science. So I just took those classes and ended up with a major and 2 minors. And, I was really good at being where my feet are in college. I was really good at just being present and having fun and building relationships with people and doing some cool stuff on campus. But when I graduated, I did such a good job at being present that I sort of graduated and wanted to get hired and nobody would really hire me. And, one of the big failures in my life that I think helped sort of helped me get into what I'm into now is I wanted to do Teach for America in college. And like I was, as you can probably tell, like I was pretty passionate about helping people. So teaching and coaching, I think, kind of are similar paths. And so I did not get into that program. And so I ended up moving back to Washington, D.C., which is where I'm from, and started working in sales. And as I was working in sales, I had lunch one day at the Cheesecake Factory with a woman named Julie Ellion. And Julie actually texted me this morning that we've got to get back together because we haven't seen each other in a while. She was working as a mental performance coach, and she did a lot of work on the PGA Tour. So, publicly, she worked with Phil Mickelson and worked with a lot of other top golfers in the world. And so Julie took me to lunch, said, Brian, I know you love helping people. I know you are somebody who is observant and perceptive. And I think that you would be really interested in the career that I have. And I was like, yeah, tell me about it. So she told me about it. We finished up our conversation. It was the most natural, organic conversation I had as I was trying to have coffee and lunch with anybody who would talk to me because I had no idea what I wanted to do for a living. And I said to her, I'm just not interested in going back to school right now. I want to work and, earn a living. And so I stayed in sales for about 2.5, 3 years and circled back to Julie and said, I think I'm ready to go explore further sports psychology. And I took an online class. I shadowed her. I did a bunch of research, and then she helped me figure out where to go to grad school, and off I went. And I really went with the intention of, gosh, I could help people and work in sports. What's better than that? Like I knew I loved sports. I knew it was a language I understood. And I've always been passionate about helping others and being in service to others. So it just made a lot of sense, and graduated from grad school, moved back to DC, collaborated with Julie on some things, and then went my separate way and started my practice and my business, and it sort of built from there. So that's the short story. There's other pieces along the way, but that's the journey that I've been on career-wise.
Yeah. And I mean, having that love of being able to kind of marry the two things that you love, helping people, helping athletes, and then two, being involved in the sporting world, even though it's not as a coach, it's not as an athlete yourself, it's as a mental performance coach. So it's that in that kind of niched area where you can really dive in and help people in that specific way.
Yeah. And I just love the complexity of the mind and the challenges that come up for people, especially when they're performing. And I've always been in awe of elite athletes. I just think their capacity and ability to perform, especially under pressure, is remarkable. And so as a fan, I've always enjoyed that. And as I got to know a lot of elite athletes personally, it always was really fun to learn from them, grow with them, help them cultivate their mindset. And it definitely is what I'm meant to be doing, is working with people to either see new possibilities that they hadn't seen before or maximize their ability to fulfill their potential. So it's a great field. And over the years, I've also developed some of my practice in the executive coaching realm. I do some speaking, and then I also coach some sports coaches as well. So I like to be entrepreneurial. I like to create new things and adapt and adjust and think differently and be a little bit contrarian. So that's a little bit more about me.
Yeah. And so, Brian, did you go into this space then with the desire to specifically help elite athletes and collegiate athletes, or was the focus really on just helping, kind of casting that broad net of I want to help any athlete?
Yeah, when I was in grad school, they would ask, like, who do you want to focus on? And I always said, I don't care. I don't care if it's a 10-year-old or a 65-year-old or a pro athlete or a college athlete or a lacrosse player or a water polo player. Like it never mattered to me. And so when I started my practice, that was the approach I took. So I worked with a lot of high school kids. I ended up capping or sort of putting a floor on the age to 10. I had some parents call me that had kids that were like 8 or 7 or 9. I was like, yeah, I just didn't feel like I could help them that much and my energy wasn't there. So, it would be though, I could be working with like a 10-year-old golfer and then working with an NBA player back-to-back meetings, and I like the diversity. And nowadays, I think I'm more interested in working with adults. I've been at this for about a decade, and as I've evolved and had kids, and my world's changed, I think I'm more inclined and interested in working with adults. But the population that I actually love to work with is, I know, a population that you are passionate about, which is 18 to 22-year-olds, 23-year-olds. College age kids are great to work with. I found that high school athletes typically are just, they come in, they'll listen to you, and then they just are in the listening stage, and they're used to going to school, going to practice, and then maybe I see them for an hour, and then they listen to their parents, and then they do their homework, and it's like rinse and repeat. So there's not always a whole lot of space for them to gain some self-awareness on how they see the world. And I notice a big shift once I get them in college. And the college kids are so awesome to work with because they don't know it all yet, but they know enough. And so they're really trying to find themselves and figure out how they want to show up and their values and what they care about. And it might not be in complete alignment with their parents, and that's okay. So I work with GW Athletics, and that's George Washington University in DC, and American University Athletics. And in the past, I worked at University of Maryland Athletics as well. And I just love that age because it's a great time to help someone develop and grow and figure out who they are and how they want to show up.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, reflecting on one, you've been in it for 10 years and being able to see the different age groups, but then two, to kind of hone in and be able to focus on that age group that you really resonate with and that you feel you can help most. And so it's interesting too to think about, I guess at the high school level, it's more so, it's not necessarily that you're helping the high school age athletes, but you have to, I would imagine, get their parents on board or their coaches on board in order to interact with them and get them to educate them in the sense that having a mental performance coach is necessary. It's a need. And then at the collegiate level, though, is that kind of the same way it works? Are you educating more so the parents before you interact with the athletes, or are you educating their specific sport coaches before you talk to the athletes?
Yeah, so you're spot on. So high school, there were teams that I would work with, and I'd work with the high school team, and then I do presentations and help them that way. But most of my individual clients, the one-on-one coaching would come from the parents. In college, it's a mixture of speaking and one-on-one. So, but that typically comes through the athletic department, and also the team. So the team will hire me, or the athletic department will hire me, and then I'll have office hours and can help them one-on-one. So in college, I'm also not typically dealing with parents, which makes my job a little bit easier.
Right.
Parents just bring a different dynamic to it. But to be honest with you, I rarely had issues with parents that I worked with. I set the expectations pretty early that, hey, this is not a transactional relationship. I'm not going to help your kid get a Division I scholarship. If you want your kid to develop and learn some skills that I think will help them in life and hopefully help them, on the tennis court or the golf course or basketball court, then let's work together. If not, then I'm probably not your guy. And so I was very, from the beginning, intentional to not make my work completely attached to results. And look, anybody that works in sports knows that results matter and winning and losing matters. But especially when you're working with under 18-year-old kids, I think it's important that that's not the focus of our work together. So yeah, it's a different dynamic. And then the pros, once again, like, of course, winning and losing really matters. But I've been around some amazing coaches who have lost a lot. There's a lot that goes into winning and losing. And so, at the pro level, it's just trying to create space for people to grow and develop and be the best version of them. So it's different at the different levels for sure. But I enjoy them all for different reasons, but I definitely love that college age just because there's a curiosity and a thirst and a desire and a fearlessness that often exists there that is really fun to work with.
Yeah, and I mean, I think too, like you said, they're kind of distancing themselves from their parents because it's, their first time out on their own, and so they're able to to some degree, I make decisions and decide, okay, I want to do this. I want to have a mental performance coach to help my overall athletic career. But you touched on something really interesting too, because you're right. Sports are inherently tied to results, winning and losing, whether you excel in an event and you score points for an event, whatever it is that you do, it's tied inherently to results. And so the mental performance coach aspect it's a clearly needed aspect, because I've worked with collegiate athletes. I've been a collegiate athlete. I get to speak with them on this show. And you just see it. You know that the mental performance side it's almost far more than the physical side. It's like 90% mental. It's what goes on in your head more so than what you're actually physically capable of. But showing those results, it's harder. Like you said, you can't tie them directly to results. So how, Brian, do you go about kind of educating then athletes, young athletes, parents, coaches in the fact that this is a needed thing for these athletes?
So first off, I want to hear a little bit about your background. So you did track and field, right?
I did, yes.
So did you ever see a mental performance coach or a sports psychologist to help you with your performance?
I never did. But in the aftermath, after reflecting back on my career and, speaking to incredible people like yourself, I realized how helpful this is something is needed. But what really made me realize it was in the aftermath of graduating college, I coached my collegiate team as an assistant coach for a couple seasons, and working with those young athletes, specifically the freshmen and sophomores. I remember having conversations with our head coach and just realizing that a mental performance coach was something that they really could have benefited in having.
Yeah, so I would just let you do my job for me, and there you go. So
there you go.
And look, like I think the point that I would make is that there's an old saying, you can't bring a horse to water that doesn't want to go.
Yeah.
And then I was at a conference once, and I heard a coach, a sports coach, it was like an Olympic coach, and he said, but you can make them thirsty. So you can make the horse thirsty. And I love that, because for years I would say I can't bring a horse to water that doesn't want to go, which essentially meant like, look, if you're not interested in my work, I can't help you, help you in any way. And to be honest, when I would go into pro locker rooms, there were definitely players that were not interested in the work that I do, or on college campuses, there were sometimes sports coaches that weren't interested, or they thought that's their job or whatever it might be. And so I just took this approach of my job just to make them thirsty. So, maybe I can send them a TED Talk or a podcast or an article or some research that can just be in service to them, and then, keep them thirsty. And then whenever the horse is ready, maybe the horse will come, maybe it won't, but I'm not going to take it personally either way. And so I think that's a big thing for all of us to learn, whether we're in sales or marketing, whatever we're doing in this world, is like our job is to continue to make others thirsty and continue to add value and show up, even if it seems like they're not interested. So that was a game changer for me. And I started to just say, you know what, I'm going to do what I do. I'm going to do it with energy and enthusiasm. And there are going to be people that maybe don't see the value in it. And that's their prerogative. It's totally cool. They're entitled to that. And honestly, not even begrudge them. Like, I think if I was young, when I was younger, I'd be like, F you, I'll show you. Sort of like I was when I was 16. And I just started to realize, like, that doesn't actually serve me. It doesn't serve them. It doesn't serve our field. So it's like, hey, just keep doing good work, and hopefully good stuff will happen, and, work from the inside out rather than let the external world sort of impact you internally.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, because one, it's reflecting back on you as a young athlete. Would you have received something like this? But then two, having the realization of you're not trying to convince or bring over everybody. There is a market for this, there's a niche for this, and people who actually need it and are seeking that help. And so then you are able to implement that and bring that to them. And so then for you, Brian, you said it ultimately led you going into the mental performance coach route, allowed you to start your own business. So is that strong skills? Is that the kind of the emphasis or the genesis of that?
Yeah, so I'm an entrepreneur, I guess by nature. My dad is a business person and entrepreneur. And so I got some of his sort of dreamy mind. And like, once I have an idea, I usually go pretty relentlessly in attacking it. I'm sure you do too. I mean, you launched this podcast and now you're 200 some plus. Like, there's something in you that is like, all right, I have a vision, I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to keep going. I have that as well, until I'm like, all right, I don't want to do this anymore. And then I'll just stop. And so Strong Skills was created because I had come from the sports psychology world, and then I had entered this executive coaching world, and I noticed in that world that they would call the skills like leadership, communication, emotional intelligence, they would call those things soft skills. And coming from sports, I'm sure if your coach, you're on the track one day and your coach calls you soft, it's not a compliment.
Right.
And in sports, if we call people soft, it's usually not a good thing. And so I came from sports and I'm entering this corporate world, and they're all saying, yeah, you guys work with soft skills. And I was like, nah, that doesn't sound very valuable. Soft skills versus hard skills. Which one are you going to prioritize? Well, you're going to prioritize hard skills. They're more important. So Strong Skills was created with the idea that we're going to transform how the world thinks about these skills. And we're really on a mission to do that. And I've brought along a few people that are in the mental performance space, a few people that are in the executive coaching space, and all of us sort of also play in both of those in some capacity. So really excited about it. And we are planning to go into organizations and change how they develop their people and have them thinking about, developing their people in a way that involves one-on-one coaching and also involves workshops and sort of group experiences. And I think our thesis is that people learn really well in a one-on-one setting, and then people can also learn great in a team setting. And I think track and field is actually a good example. Like, you can do great work as a individual runner, but there's something to the medley or running together or pushing each other that's also extremely valuable. So we just believe in individual growth and then team growth and the power that can come from both of those.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so then is Strong Skills the ultimate goal? It's not just for then sports organizations. Would the goal to be then to expand into, like you said, kind of corporations or kind of at the corporate level?
Yeah, so that's what we're doing now is we're in both.
Okay.
So service athletes, service sports organizations and teams, and then also service executives and go into companies and also help them develop their people. We're basically obsessed with developing talent and developing humans for performance and humans for leadership. And those are the two things that we spend a lot of time thinking about and creating models on, and really focus on how do we develop people to perform, and how do we develop leaders to influence those people and bring out their best.
Mm-hmm. And so from there, Brian, I mean, having Strong Skills develop, like you said, you had that entrepreneurial drive and spirit and wanting this to come about. And then too, in tandem with that, with your Intentional Performers podcast, what drove you to create that? Does that work in tandem with Strong Skills? Just what is that podcast?
So I'm not the greatest when it comes to branding and having everything be completely aligned. That podcast for me is like, I get to interview interesting people that are intentional with their lives. And, some of the nuggets that come out of that can help people personally, others professionally. We have athletes on there. We have military. We have CEOs. We have activists. I honestly, it's a platform for me to learn from all kinds of different people and just develop and think about how I'm showing up intentionally. And in turn, hopefully, the listener is thinking about what am I doing intentionally to show up the way that I want. Originally, the podcast was called Beyond the Surface. And the thinking there was to go beyond the surface with a lot of performers, a lot of athletes to learn, deeper than the playing surface. And after about 30 episodes, I realized all of these people are really intentional with how they show up. And so we pivoted the podcast to be called Intentional Performers. And it's been a labor of love. I don't even know how many episodes I'm in. You're better at keeping track of your episodes. I think we're at like 180 or 190 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
So it's been, I think, 4 years and every week. And, it's been really, really fun and had some amazing people on the podcast. It's just a great opportunity for me to learn and grow and develop. And in turn, hopefully my listeners can as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I love that you speak and you get in front of organizations and individuals. So then kind of making that transition onto a media platform such as a podcast makes a lot of sense then to continue those conversations. But like you said, being able to interview all these intentional performers. So with the podcast and then also with Strong Skills, is there a lot of overlap or do you see one kind of feeding into the other?
For sure. So the last person I interviewed was the athletic director at Johns Hopkins University. Her name is Jen Baker, and we just recorded it today. And she was talking about leadership in the conversation. And she was also a Navy fighter pilot. She was a lacrosse player, just an awesome, awesome person. And she thinks about leadership. So I get to learn from her on leadership. And then at Strong Skills, we develop leaders. So there is some crossover there that I just think makes me better at my job. So it's a beautiful platform, as you know, to learn, to grow. And then I'm just obsessed with podcasts. I think it's an awesome medium to develop yourself and learn from people that we don't always have access to in person. So there has been overlap, and you know, I've had some clients come on the podcast, some teams that I work with, their coaches come on the podcast. It's just been a great labor of love, a great quote unquote side hustle, I think similar to you, but I think for me, it also allows me to meet all kinds of interesting people inside sport, inside business, people that are just changing the world. And those are the people I want to be around.
Yeah. And I mean, I love that kind of branching yourself. Of course, there is, like you said, crossover, but two distinct practices that you have. So with Strong Skills being that coach, and then two, putting on the podcaster interviewer hat and being able to ask these questions and pull these stories out of people. And so Brian, having both this in person and as well as your online platforms, specifically with your mental performance coach initiatives, specifically in the past couple of months, but just over time since you started Strong Skills, do you meet with clients online too, or is it predominantly just an in-person type of interaction?
So I've been working with pro athletes for a while, and for pro athletes, they're all over the place and they're traveling. So I'm used to using Zoom.
Yeah.
And then a lot of my executive clients as well are all over the country. So I'm very comfortable using Zoom. I did have one pro athlete who, once COVID hit, said, you know what, let's get back together once we're able to meet in person. So it wasn't working for him, but everybody else that I work with has been comfortable doing it remotely. And honestly, when I first started doing this work, I wasn't sure if I was comfortable with it. And then I just started doing it. I had a lot of pro basketball players that were overseas that I worked with. And so for a lot of those people, I just got used to using, at the time I was using Skype, and then we switched to Zoom. And I think it's a really effective tool, and I enjoy being, leveraging it in that way. So we still can do all of our work, in that regard.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, a lot of what you do, it allows for that inherently. And so that's great that you were already doing that. And so it just to kind of seamlessly then continue your business. And so Brian, with the Intentional Performers podcast, as well as with Strong Skills, looking forward, I know you've been in this business, both of them, for a long time, and you've garnered all this experience, but looking forward, what are you aiming at? What is your ultimate goal for these two?
There's some exciting stuff going on right now. So if you think about what has happened in the world that I'm in, is that coaching for athletes has always been a thing. Like, everybody gets coached in sports. So a lot of these executives are sort of saying, hey, if Serena Williams gets coached, if Michael Phelps gets coached, if LeBron James gets coached, shouldn't I get coached? Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of executives now are really open to executive coaching. And I think the next pillar is actually boomeranging that back to sports coaches and coaching those sports coaches. So what really fires me up now is working with sports coaches and helping them influence their team and create a culture and think about their identity and what that might look like. So that's where I think we're going with Strong Skills, is really being able to service teams and organizations and sports and in the business world and nonprofits as well. And so that's what I'm really excited about. And then, like, from me personally, I have a book that's coming out in October that I'm really excited about, and it blends all of my experiences with high performers and the stuff that I've studied, and I added a lot of research in there. And so that book's called Shift Your Mind, and it leverages a framework that really thinks about performance as a polarity. So in preparation, we should be humble, And in performance, we should be arrogant. In preparation, we should be perfectionistic. And in performance, we should be adaptable. In preparation, we should be selfish. And in performance, we should be selfless. So the book is really about high performance. And I think too often we tell people to be one thing, and often we need to figure out when we are some way, and we need to be able to shift our mind from preparation to performance. So really excited about that. And hopefully that changes some of the narrative as far as how we think about mindset for elite performance.
What made you decide that writing a book was something that you wanted to do?
So I'll tell you, it's painful. If you're ever interested in writing one, it's an arduous process. I've always enjoyed like writing. I stopped and started a few books, and then this was an idea that I just couldn't get out of my head. I was seeing it help my clients. I would sit with clients and talk about their mindset for preparation, their mindset for performance, and they would create a long list. So at some point I had 30 plus of these shifts. And so it just started smacking me in the face over and over again. And it got me to a point where I just felt like it could help people and make an impact. And I thought the best way to inform people about this polarity and these binaries and these shifts was to write a book and to get into as many hands as possible. I love one-on-one coaching. I think I'll always do one-on-one coaching.
Yeah.
To me, there's nothing better than sitting with someone, asking them questions and helping them figure out where they want to go. The downside to one-on-one coaching is you can't go broad. And so I'm hoping that a book, just like my podcast, can influence and impact people in a positive way.
Absolutely. And so then is Shift Your Mind geared towards then those current athletes looking for that mental performance coach? Is it geared towards coaches, parents? Who is the audience that you're aiming at?
Now you sound like a publisher. That's the questions they ask.
I'm just curious.
And it's the same with the podcast. And Katie, you do such a good job before we started talking, explaining who your audience is. I'm not great at that. So what I do, and you could probably hear it with my podcast, is like I just go towards things that excite me and interest me. And so, look, the book is for athletes. It is for salespeople. It is for leaders. It's for anybody who's competing and wants to get better and grow and develop and is thinking about their mindset. So that's how I think about it. But I've talked about the framework that we use with all kinds of different people, moms, doctors, military. And when I tell them about it, they're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When I'm at my best, I'm actually different than how I'm preparing. There's actually a shift that I do. So I think it's a broad audience, but I definitely think people that are competing and are being judged and evaluated and care about quote unquote winning, the book will hopefully be a great resource for them.
Yeah, and I think it ties to what you were saying before, where it's you have that educational component of you want to show people how important having a mental performance coach is, but you're going to come across athletes and parents or coaches that might not see the value in it, and you're not trying to convince them with every bit of your fiber of being to bring them over, but there's people who see this value and see this need. So it's somebody, like you said, kind of casting that net of you never know who could be interested in it. So writing a book for anybody to pick up and find value in and really be, have their interest sparked or be inspired by.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of sports analogies because that's where I've lived. That's what I see. That's the language I understand.
Yeah.
But there's also business. We talk about music. We talk about art. I think performance can be relatively broad. And so I hope that it resonates with people outside of sports, but there's definitely a sports tinge to it. And, there's probably more sports stories in there than anything else, but there's also some other stuff in there that I think people will enjoy learning from.
Yeah, and I mean, that makes sense, of course, drawing on that athletic background, but like you said, it's for organizations, it's for people not involved in the athletic world, but it has kind of those undertones. And so, Brian, I mean, knowing you've accomplished so much in your life and with business, being an entrepreneur, and then looking forward, having this clear vision of where you want things to go and knowing, of course, that you're going to achieve all those goals. I just have one final question that I ask all of my interviewees. What do you want to be remembered for?
Being a good person. Like I think all of the stuff I work on is performance and greatness and I love that stuff, but like legacy wise, first of all, I kind of think legacy's overrated. I go back and forth on this because like I don't have any clue what my great grandparents did. And so at some point it fades unless you're royalty or, an heir or a Rockefeller. Like I just think we need to do the best we can with what we got right here, right now. And so, but at the end of the day, like, I think I'd much rather be judged by my character, by the people that know me, than my reputation. And so while I love putting out a book and I love the podcast and love doing all this stuff, like the most important thing for me is that the people that know me know that I'm a good person, that I'm there for them, that I, act with integrity. I think if I'm remembered that way, that would be a life well lived.
Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. To learn more about our guest, check out the show notes at keepmovingforward.us. While you're there, go ahead and subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date on all things coming out of the KMF Collective Studio. Always remember, you can beat the odds and go the distance if only you keep moving forward.